Hey, how you doing? My name is Douglas Rundles, and today we're going to talk about interpersonal communications. And we're going to talk about the journey that I took and how I strive to be a better communicator. These are the agendas. Of course, we're going to talk about the communication test that we took early in the course. We're going to talk about behavioral blends. We're going to talk about some overarching goals, potential barriers, noise pollution, plan of action. We're going to talk about the Dr. Peterson book review, and we're going to talk about the movie Fireproof. All right, this is my interpersonal communication skills test. As it pointed out, overall results, I got an 82 out of 100, which I guess are not bad. What it points out that I have very good insightfulness, very good verbal expression, assertiveness. I topped it out at a 100, but pretty much where I was lacking at was the communication piece. Well, not communication so much, but the listening skills piece. And so my listening skills were, I guess, more or less mediocre. And so that's one of the things that I strive for in the course. Because in being a better communicator, it's hard to be a better communicator without being a better listener. And in emotional management, which also I got a 100 in. Again, I think that's still some area that I'm trying to get better in. You should always try to be better because I think that's a part about being a Christian. I believe that as you communicate with people, and it's all about striving relationships. Much like when Jesus said, you can say you love me who you haven't seen, or you love my father who you haven't seen, but you don't love your brother that you see every day. And so as we strive to be better communicators, it's not only good that we're better communicators in our prayer life and time spent with God, but also better communicators with people we see every day. My behavioral blend. Well, just to give you a little bit about my background, I'm active duty military. And so being in the military, just my makeup is kind of different. My whole adult life, I've been in the military. And so when you have that kind of structured life, it's kind of, it's hard to go back and forth, or it's everything is pretty much structured. And so when you're talking about being a better communicator, in the military, we're told to obey orders, or we're taught to obey orders. So in being a communicator, most of the time, it's used to being one-sided. And so when I'm talking to a subordinate, I might even tell them that you're in receive mode. I don't expect a lot of feedback. But as you become a better communicator, I would even say so a better leader. As you become a better leader, you realize that no man is an island. You realize that you can't do it all by yourself. And so you're relying on the feedback of subordinates. You're relying on the feedback of others in order to make you a better leader, a better communicator. Because you to yourself, even though you have subordinates under you, still subordinate to somebody else. When you talk about again life experiences, it's hard to the way I was even brought up. My mom, my dad, the household makeup. I was raised in the church, or brought up in the church, and so it was real easy for me to follow, because just like I follow military regulations and guidelines, I followed the Bible. So the military, it was kind of easy for me to kind of fall in line to, but it's just generally when I'm communicating with people that are not structured, people that don't have some clear cut goal, it's kind of hard to follow them. So my kind of behavioral blend, or what I learned from both subordinates and from my supervisors, is that okay, I work better when things are clear cut, when objectives are given to me and they're easy to follow. Some of the negative influences, I know, kind of what I alluded to earlier, is just sometimes, leaders, typically in the military, we've been taught that, everything is kind of streamlined. Sometimes that we're in receive mode, and sometimes you don't have enough time to explain why we're doing particular things. And so what I've learned particularly, at least in my behavioral blend or in the military, is just that, when given the time, take time to explain to your subordinates or to your soldiers what's going on, or this is the reason why we're doing the thing. What I've learned in combat is because, when combat and stress levels are high, you have to be, that's when communication should be at its best. Because, I'm personally, my job in the military is communications. When we talk about radios, when we talk about satellites, and we tell them all the time that if you can't communicate on the battlefield, then you can't lead on the battlefield. And so that's why it was always important to me that as a communicator, that our point gets across. So as we're bringing our point across, it's important to know that okay, it's not enough that I say it, but I need to make sure that it's understood and comprehended as well. My overarching goal. My overarching goal was just all throughout the course, I would think, okay, the Bible talks about be swift to listen, slow to speak. Swift to listen, slow to speak. And I had an issue with that. Much like I'm sure a lot of people throughout the course is when they're listening to somebody, especially when somebody's coming to you and you might think they want advice. And so really, as soon as they start talking, you almost have in mind already what you want to say to them. You have in your mind, and so all you're really doing, you're anticipating, waiting until they're finished. You're not really listening. And that's something I've learned. I've learned that even from listening to my children, I've learned this even from listening to uh, my wife, that, I can be a better listener. And so by actually listening to what they're saying, I can actually chew on things. I can actually be able to provide better feedback because I'm actually listening. I didn't make some preconceived notion. I didn't have the answer already even before they start speaking. Better listener, good feedback. I think even as a better listener, I think we have to be a better listener even when we're listening to the voice of God. I believe that God is always speaking to us. So if God is speaking too, so we have to be in tune to listen. And so when you talk about being a better listener, I think it's kind of one-sided to think that we just need to be better listeners of people. I think we need to be better listeners of God as well. And again, kind of getting back to feedback. That's how we're able to buy better feedback because we've actually listened to the person. Strengthening relationships. They talk about conflict. Conflict, what better way? Iron sharpens iron. And so I believe that, just like I sharpen the countenance of another, by having conflict, conflict is good. I believe that at some point in any relationship, whether you're talking about a parent relationship, parent child relationship, whether you're talking about the spousal relationship, whether you're talking about the leader subordinate relationship, okay, you're trying to better that relationship. And so if you're not communicating properly, that relationship is not going to get better. And so as you strive for better communication, as you strive to strengthen the relationship, it's important that you keep certain things in mind. Because just like I said before, that's the real purpose of conflict. It's just like I don't have any problem. Me personally, I wouldn't argue with a racist. I'm not trying to better. I mean, even though there's conflict, what would I get out of that conversation? We're not, there's no, I'm not trying to strive to see eye to eye to that person. So again, conflict is, realistically what I'm trying to better the relationship with the person. Being a peacemaker. This is something maybe I had a hard time dealing with. I, and don't get me wrong now, I do like peace, but it's just that I knew that internally, I was kind of a rabble rouser. Sometimes, and I'm not that proud to say it, but sometimes for the mere fact of entertainment, I would do things to be like, hey, let's get things shaking around here. Let's get things moving. I don't, for some reason, peace and quiet drives me nuts. It's just that, and maybe it has something to do with my ADHD, maybe just a little bit. But what I understood is that okay, that in order to better communicate with people and with my environment, in order to become a better leader, that it's not about just stirring up friction. It's not about just and bringing on conflict, just a better relationship. Sometimes there's a better way to do it, and being a problem solver. And so when you realize that okay, this is an issue, Mike Murdoch, he said that, what? There's things that you're problem solvers. And so just like the trash man, he solves problems and the doctor solves problems. And you get paid according to the kind of problems you solve. And so I wanted to be the best problem solver that I could be. Potential barriers. I mean, habits. You have a habit of not necessarily listening to people. And so as you have this habit of not listening to people, you have to be particularly careful because, it takes time. It may take anywhere from like 21 to 30 days in order to train yourself in order to be a better listener. I keep on harping on better communication, but if you're not a better listener, then it's hard to become a better communicator. And of course, unrealistic conflict. The whole point of conflict is not that you get your way or that you both agree. Because when you're talking about a relationship with somebody, a relationship is going to consist of compromise. And so when you think about compromising with the other person, that's the win-win. You don't, when you win, lose, I think it's really lose lose. And then fatigue. Sometimes, there are some points, where you're stressed out. There's some point where your body is wore down, where it's just that, I mean, that potentially could be one of the deciding factors that should actually contradict good communication. So you got to be careful when your body's when you're fatigued or when you're exhausted. Noise pollution and some of the solutions. You know, naysayers. As you try to be better at communicating with anybody, there are gonna be naysayers. Um, and you got to kind of block those out too. What I found out is just I have more issue with internal noise than as opposed to external noise. And so when I look internally, I have to tell myself that I'm gonna be better. I have to practice. Sometimes when I say a better listener, sometimes you got to be a better listener of yourself. Better listener of yourself. And so when you're talking about listening to even the Holy Spirit, when you talk about listening to God, it's just that you got to cut some of the other stuff out. And much like when Jesus would separate himself sometimes, getting away from the crowds, you have to separate yourself from some of the noise pollution or some of the things that happens throughout your life or throughout your day as well. Inviting others to the conversation. This is my plan of action. My plan of action was always to, figuring out, what being a better listener does for me. And so I realized early on that being a better listener for me, just made me made me better at resolving conflicts. And so I knew that my what now was okay, now that I've decided to be a better communicator, to put it into action and just to strive to be a better communicator every day. And this is when we start talking about the book review. It comes for self-evaluation from the beginning. How am I communicating? How am I coming across to people? That's important. So as I start to strive to become better at communicating to people and becoming a better communicator, I realize too that, this is about me. This is about how I'm a communicator. Sharing, negotiating, that's all about communication as well. When you talk about negotiating, and we talked about earlier, is compromise with other people. And so, all throughout the book, when they were talking about how we're sharing and negotiating, it's important too to realize that it's about the win-win. So the ultimate goal is the win-win. Respond. How I responded, or how I chose to respond to this, I decided that, what, I want my life to be better, and so I'm going to choose to be better in communicating. As I reflect all throughout the course, even all throughout my life, I realized that there were some gaps, there were some breaches in my communication. And so, and in an effort to be better at communicating, I strive to do just that. Act. And so this is what all about, putting this plan into action. I choose every day. So whether it's talking to leaders, subordinate, talking to children of my wife, or even when it comes to maybe teaching a lesson throughout in church or leading a Bible study, I chose to, what, I'm gonna listen twice as often as I speak. And finally, the movie Fireproof. When you talk about everything you put into a marriage. And when you're talking about thinking about your life partner and what you decide to do, that's important too. That's important that as a person, what, that I'm an imperfect person and I'm married to an imperfect person. So knowing that, you got to strive to be better, be a better influencer. And so sometimes that's listening. When you're communicating with somebody, the best communication process is love. And that's pointed out in 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 8. So that's real love. Real love is kind, kind-hearted, and doesn't hold any regret against anybody. and what the head of household really means. The head of household submission actually means to fall up under the mission. And so as men, I think that if we become the people that God has called us to be, it's real easy for women to fall in line and fall up under us. That's pretty much my slide presentation, my inner communication. Just in conclusion, thanks for listening. My desire for you is to be a better communicator and a better lover of God. Thank you.